So, welcome everyone. It is a very, very big pleasure to officially open the Deep Learning Indaba𝕏 South Africa Roadshow. My name is Maria Schult and I'm speaking to you on behalf of the organizing team. And for the next 3 months, we will have some of South Africa's best machine learning and data science labs host fantastic events and competitions. And you learn, amongst other things, about how to grow your own startup, how to create good notebooks of code, how to code in Python, why to appreciate collaborative research, and how to play StarCraft with reinforcement learning. And you also interact with other machine learning enthusiasts on our community forum, and you may even decide to enter some of the competitions. Before we start with today's wonderful opening event hosted by CapeAI, we want to explain what this roadshow is about, what you can expect, and how you can engage, which is the most important one. So let me quickly share my screen. I think we need to kick off one of the panelists because I can't share my screen because we're too many behind the scenes here. And I'm also really happy to see, so there are 170 people live on this event. We're also streaming on YouTube, and I can see that people come from all over the place: Cape Town, Stellenbosch, Durban, Greece, for some reason, Austria. Okay, there we go. Great. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the deep learning Indaba. For those of you who are new to the Indaba family, give you some background information. So 4 years ago, a group of mostly South Africans, and many of them actually expats working for big machine learning companies, especially Google, Microsoft, decided to bring back their resources and what they've learned overseas and organize a conference. And it happened at BITS, and it was called the Deep Learning Indaba. Maybe please also feel free to post in the chat if you have been at that first event, which was like really memorable, because they brought not only high-profile speakers, brilliant content, but they also had a really mind-blowing amount of passion, and it was tangible. And I think I can say that the room was really electrified, like especially like in the opening ceremony. It was like everyone was holding their breath. And I had the pleasure to be part of it and remember quite vividly how on our way back in a taxi, a colleague, I don't know if he's here actually, Yassine, he later won Indaba PhD awards, and he's actually organizing his own satellite events. And he commented on how proud he is that the words deep learning and Indaba are actually united in one word. And because they seem to come from such like strangely different worlds. And this is obviously not, it doesn't have to be the case. And so after the initial success, the Deep Learning Indaba was turned into a yearly conference, and it now tours the African countries, so if it's not for the pandemic. And it quickly became actually something more. It was like almost like a movement. So people speak of the Indaba spirit. And I personally realized what this is when I went to the Black in AI event at Europe. So for those of you who are not from machine learning, like this is a big, big conference, one of the most prestigious ones in the world. And usually you're there, you're tired, you're overwhelmed, you feel a bit foreign, you know, especially if you're not like, if this is not your crowd you usually hang out with. And then I entered the Black and I ballroom one night, and I realized not only do I know almost half of the people in the room, but I've actually brushed my teeth next to them in dingy backpackers and danced the night away on some conference parties. And all of this was at Indaba events. So I literally felt at home. And the Indaba spirit, to keep it short, like stands for making machine learning a home to people from the African continent and to enrich it along the way by actually like contributing what we have to contribute to machine learning. And as we know, this is a powerful field to contribute to. So the deep learning Indaba𝕏, so now the X comes in, are satellite versions of this main event, and they happen all over Africa. And an Indaba𝕏 can range from 3 people meeting in a room, discussing some ML or some deep learning, but it can also mean like a full-sized week-long conference. And so this event is really part of something bigger. So these are the events that happened this year. And as you know, this year is pandemic year still. So it's quite amazing to see that still like a lot of things are happening out there. And in South Africa, we had Indaba𝕏 events right from the start. So there was one 2018 in Cape Town, a smaller one. 2019, we went bigger in Durban. Some of you might see themselves on these pictures. And the team organizing them is typically like a loose collection of volunteers. You submit a bid basically to host the event. And it's not an exclusive organization at all. So the people on behalf of whom I'm speaking, they're literally just like you guys, but they just spend every now and then half an hour to make a flyer or form or send out emails. And you basically grab the responsibilities you see lying around. So I have to give a big shout out to the organizers of the 2020 event, because last year, and also some of you might know this because you were registered for this event, after organizing for months and months, just 2 weeks before the 2020 event, everything lined up, cool speakers, cool events there, like COVID hit our shores. And I still remember the organizing meeting where we said, no, there's a 1% chance we have to cancel the conference. And literally 3 days later, we were in level 5 lockdown, which was obviously really, really sad. And now at the beginning of 2021, we thought, okay, what can we do? We don't want a lost generation of people who have no chance to kind of like go to an IndabaVX event and be part of this. But we also didn't want to host yet another online conference, because there's lots on YouTube. If you invite speakers, they just add another YouTube link to their profile, basically, and no one really interacts. And the idea of IndabaX is really the connection, the face-to-face connection. So we kind of went back and asked ourselves, what do we actually want to achieve? And that was pretty clear. We want to connect. We want to connect the centers of knowledge in machine learning and data science in South Africa to the talent that's out there, that's also required to grow them. We want to provide platforms. We want to provide opportunities. And so we didn't have much time also between us, because all of us have professional careers or PhDs or whatever to tend to. And this is how we came up with this idea of a roadshow, in which we let the South African labs, companies, and also research group take the stage and present what they do and what they find important, and basically share their knowledge and ideas with you. So you can check out online the schedule. Oh, basically, I want to just give a big shout out to Siobhan and to also Jean. So you see Jean later. Siobhan you won't see, because she has really taken a lot of the organization this year, and she's new in the team. So that is like really, really wonderful. Yes, you see the schedule. You see that we have our wonderful events lined up for the next 3 months. Please join them all, share the links, come there and interact. But there's actually more to it. So it doesn't end here. We just have online events. We still have screens in front of us, and only the brave may be seen with a few questions. So this is why we opened the Discord community forum. If you sign up to the webpage, IndabaX.co.za, you get a link to join the forum. And we set up some channels there already, as you can see, but we will adapt them to your needs. And the forum is monitored all the time. You will almost at any time find someone who is a machine learning veteran in there. And you can use this to ask questions, to announce events, to find supervisors, to share, to make jokes. The main people who this is for is those who do not maybe work for a company or a big lab, and they don't have, just a Slack forum where they have networking at the, at a mouse click away. So this is really like a cool opportunity. Make this yours. During the events, the hosts will often try to be online, and so you can actually discuss things also after the events with them there, or ask, for example, for positions or whatever takes your fancy. And if this is a useful tool, we'll obviously keep it open beyond the 3 months of the roadshow. And and what you don't see on this forum right now is actually the organizers also have their private channels on there. So we're constantly basically there online. So you won't be like unseen. We're just in the hidden channels. And if you want to join the organizing team maybe next year, then we will give you permission to this like backstage sphere as well. And that will be like fantastic as well. And lastly, and then I'm almost done, we have a third pillar of the roadshow, and those are the competitions. So CapeAI has done a wonderful job, and they are organizing a hackathon that lasts for the full 3 months. You will learn about this after 4 o'clock today. You can win a share of prizes worth 20,000 Rand, and Zinti kindly sponsored the platform, so that's really cool. And then we have these 4 other awards where you can submit nominations on behalf of others, or you can also nominate yourself. And the awards are connected to cash prizes worth 10,000 Rand each, and they reward South Africa's coolest coder, most rigorous researcher. Then there's an InstaDeep sponsored Extraordinary Engagement Award. And then if you are someone who never had the chance to have maybe a formal education, or you're kind of like, no one has ever told you how to code, but you're really, really excited about machine learning, then we have the Persistent Passion Award. So the submission is quite uncomplicated. The links will go live very soon on the webpage, and then you just like submit in a form and try to make it as engaging as you want to, and to catch people's attention. Okay, enough of me. The last little bit is just some housekeeping. You probably figure out Crowdcast quicker than me, but there's a questions button where you can ask questions, and you can also vote up other questions you want to see answered. The event is recorded. It will be on the YouTube channel of the Indaba𝕏 South Africa. Links, I think, are posted probably. If it's chowing too much data, consider using, I think there's in audio and video settings, there's a compatibility mode where you can downsize. And this is the last note about data. So we know that lots of you know, like having just a gig of data to just join an event like this is quite a lot. So we're speaking to a new sponsor and hope we can also give out data scholarships of 20 gigs per person. And this will also be like relatively little red tape so you can join the events. Great. So that's it for me. We thank our sponsors. We've got a lot of sponsors. They're lovely. They are engaged. They really want to see machine learning happening in South Africa. So thanks to all of you. And yes, let the show begin. I am handing over to Jean now to CapeAI, and we'll enjoy the event on my side.
Thank you very much, Maria. Yeah, and welcome everyone. It's really, really amazing to have you all here. And yeah, it's just so awesome to see such a great turnout. And I'm going to hand over to Adit, who's our first speaker and our MC today.
Okay, great. Afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure for myself and the rest of the CapeAI team to host the first event for this year's Deep Learning in Indaba𝕏. We're really excited and we've prepared a lot of, I think you all love. So before I dive into it, I just want to reiterate the point that Maria made, which is if you'd like to ask a question, you can just pop a question clicking on that Ask a Question button at the bottom right of your screen. Just so everyone understands the format as well, what we're going into now are basically a series of lightning talks by myself and the rest of the CapeAI team. Afterwards, we will have a short break, and then we will reconvene for a panel discussion. So your questions that you pose will actually be addressed or answered, hopefully as many as we can get through, during the panel discussion round, as opposed to straight after the talks themselves. So along the way, make a note of your questions, pop them in the question box, and then afterwards, we're going to have a moderator who will be facilitating the whole question answering session. So without further ado, let me kick off. So my name is Adit Mehta. I am currently the co-founder and CEO of CapeAI and Moonshop. And so we do a lot of exciting things. And the reason that we wanted to get involved this year is because we wanted to share a lot of like really interesting lessons, stories, and tips from our journey as far as turning a machine learning idea into a startup goes. So we believe we're quite experienced at that now, having had a go at it 4 times. And there's a lot of like great insights and nuggets that we're really keen to share with you all. So I'm going to be kicking us off today, and I'm going to start with just sharing my screen. Can I just ask that we get 1 or 2 responses of thumbs ups just to indicate that you can see my screen, my presentation in presentation mode, and then I'm going to kill my camera. Okay, fantastic. All right, then let me get into it. So today I'd like to kick us off all with a recipe for startups. Now, I must just put a little bit of a caveat here, is that essentially, like if you're looking for a checklist of how to create a business, you can find many of those online, and none of them necessarily materially translate into you ending up with the business. So my title of a recipe, don't let that be misleading to say that this is a comprehensive thing of how do you actually create a business. But I'm going to touch on a lot of important things that hopefully do give you that guidance and advice. And so it's broken down into what I see as 3 different things. It's your idea, the founders, followed by infinite potential. So I'm initially going to just set a bit of context by telling you all a bit about CapeAI and what it is that we do. So CapeAI essentially has 2 pillars to their business model. The first is CapeAI Consulting, in which we basically perform a lot of machine learning and AI consulting in its traditional sense, but geared towards machine learning, data science, and AI projects. We have recently started to develop more of a niche to become specialists in the computer vision and NLP space, but also bringing in a lot of the ML ops side of things into it for our clients so that we can actually deliver real value for machine learning. The second pillar to our business model, and I think the one that's probably more relevant for our discussion here today, is our ventures business. And with our ventures business, essentially what we do is we develop productizable AI in-house that we believe has a lot of potential commercial value and or social value. And then the goal is to have these spun out into business entities of their own. And so at the bottom of the slide, you'll basically see the 4 core values that every decision making, that all decision making within CapeAI is driven by. That's entrepreneurship, trust, excellence, and fun. And everything that we have created and will create going into the future is very intentionally driven by those values. So let's get to it, right? Let's get to it in terms of you want to start a business, right? And so when you're starting out, you'll have an idea. The very first thing that I want to highlight for you all when it comes down to like turning a machine learning use case into a successful startup is that your idea does not equal innovation. All right. There's a lot of people who think that they've got ideas that are disruptive, that are innovative. But the truth of the matter is that ideas themselves are not really worth anything, right? Ideas are plenty. But actual innovation is through action. And so startups are born through action, which means if you're sitting on an idea now, you don't have anything. But the moment you start to action on that idea, you get a startup. All right. And I think it was Jeff Bezos who also described the like disruption as a term that's abused a lot, and it's something that we take to heart, right? That you don't really have something that's disruptive unless you've gotten to a point of mass adoption. And so the ideas of innovation and mass and disruption, do not confuse those for being synonymous and with your idea. Ideas need to be actioned, and startups are born through action. And so it's as simple as that. You've got an idea and you're ready to act on it, then you get a startup. And that acting on it starts with choosing co-founders, right? And this may be a unanimous discussion that you have with a couple of people. But when you choose a co-founder, this is arguably the most important thing, more important than the idea that you initially have in your business itself, all right? And this decision should not be taken lightly. And the reason for this is because your co-founders are the ones who you're going into battle with. These are the people you're going to earn your scars and your stripes with, right? And so what you need to do when you're looking for a co-founder is you need to apply an integrity test. Now, this integrity test can really depend on you. It's a very personal and subjective thing. But with this integrity test, what you're asking yourself is this a person who I can see myself going through thick and thin with? It's very much similar to choosing, I guess, like a life partner, right? In a relationship. This is something that you really want to pay a lot of attention to. And the way that you actually can perform this integrity test is by looking at core values. So if you want to start a business, you've got to do a lot of introspection around what your core values are as a person, and then trying to find alignment of those core values with your potential co-founders. If there is no values alignment, then you are putting yourself at serious risk very early on that your idea won't actually come to life. And so your idea will be just that, an idea. And very tangibly beyond that, what you need to think about with co-founders is complementary skills. So it's very important that in the machine learning space, you've got someone who understands machine learning as one of your co-founders. You've got to have a technical co-founder, someone who understands the depth of what it is that needs to be built. But you also want to complement that with someone who's got strong relationship building skills, someone who's a really, really good networker, someone who's basically got the business savviness to turn your idea into something that's commercially viable. And the moment you've basically covered and identified core values and complementary skills with someone, you've got a co-founder and you've got a startup that is on the brink of being born. So the next thing that you need to do, which you really can't get away with, is essentially admin, all right? You've got to get to a point of actually setting up your legal entity, registering the IP for your business, and getting a bank account, because you cannot operate without these things. All right. And again, this is how startups are born, through action. Okay. So depending on where you're operating, for example, South Africa, you're going to need to register your business with the CIPC. You're going to need to be able to, you need to legally trade. And then once you get that registration completed, you can actually go out and get a bank account, right? And so these nitty-gritty, I would say that these are the things that you can actually do research on and get clarity from blog posts or whatever it is, so that you have a very concrete checklist of what it is that you need to create your business. All right. So now you've found your co-founders, you've done all of the admin, and now you're going to hit the ground running. So this is where you can start to get to the exciting stuff when you're starting out. You then want to look at your hiring, right? Now with hirings, it's very important for me to stress that the type of people you hire in the early stages of your business are not necessarily the same type of people that you hire as you start to grow and as you scale. All right. And at any given point in time, you're always looking for a combination of skills and attitude. And those don't always have the perfect union. So I'll give you an example. When you're starting off, you, for example, want to build a product. And to build that product, you need a very specific skill. So maybe you find someone who's got that skill, but this person doesn't quite have an entrepreneurial vibe. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's not someone you want early on in your company. It just means you must accept the risk that comes with that, which says this person might get annoyed or frustrated or anxious with the uncertainty that the startup has. And so they might only serve their purpose within your company for about 6 months to a year. And so what you need to do is you need to ask yourself, what are the specific skills you want early on? And then what are those attitudes? The attitudes are really key, because a lot of the time you can train for the skills if you've got the time and the resources. But that attitude is very important. If you want to avoid too much churn early on, you want to find people who are committing to your vision. You want to find people who are resilient. You want to find people who align with the core values that you have, as well as the core values you set out with the company. And so hiring early on is something you shouldn't really spend too much time and effort on, because it can become a very scientific thing. You know what you need and you look for those things and you get them. You must just think a bit longer term about, okay, what are the attitudes that I need to hire for, so that starting this business is actually made a lot more comfortable and easier. Now, a very, very important thing for me to stress, that and there's no way around this really, is that the people you hire early on are going to wear many, many different hats, which means if you're a data scientist, you will most likely be advising product strategy. You'll be trying to maybe lead people. You'll be engaging with clients. Maybe you'll be doing a bit of random marketing and branding for the company. Like the scope of you, like if you're looking for a job scope or a job spec, you are not really going to find a very concrete one with the startup, right? So I guess for those of you who are joining startups, this is something to bear in mind. If wearing multiple hats is something that sounds attractive to you, the startup is the most energizing place to be. But that can also be very tiring. It's just that as a co-founder of a business, you have to get your people to wear many hats, because you need to be lead, right? You need to make the most out of the limited resources that you have. And then it's very important for you to get your workforce that you've hired to build and sell simultaneously. All right. I think we've seen this and we've made this mistake a few times, and fortunately I've corrected course very quickly. But you don't want to build a product before you've actually, like a fully fledged product, before you've actually tested it, right? Before you've actually sold it. Because for how long will you fund product development before you realize that, hey, there's no potential sale coming from this, all right? And so something that I find very interesting, if I take Moonshop as an example, is there was a point in our product development cycle where we were over engineering a lot, for example, on the UI. But really, we're just a bunch of techies, right? None of us are UI experts. Yet we'll be over democratizing the decision making being made in, oh, where should we place a button here? What color should I make the logo? What color should I make the background here? But at that point, no one had used the app. So it's kind of foolish, right? You're spending a lot of time and resources over engineering, but you haven't actually gone and sold. And then once we finally got to a point where we put this product in the hands of customers, then we start to get valuable feedback to say, hey, you know what, that feature we spent 1 hour discussing and arguing about whether it's needed, turns out it's not actually needed, right? The customer doesn't really care about the color of that button or whatever it might be. So you have to sell and build simultaneously. If you're not doing this, your startup is sort of heading down a very dangerous path, I should say. And then the last thing that I want to mention when it comes down to like starting out with your business is that you have to be intentional about the brand that you build from day one. Okay, and you have to intentionally build this and craft it and market it from the beginning. And the reason you want to do this is because that selling simultaneously while you build is going to come from the brand that you create. Hiring the talent that you need to build and to sell is going to come from the brand that you create. So as co-founders and that initial co-founding team or founding team, what you have to do is you have to be intentional about the brand that you create and build from day one. So if you've sort of gone through this journey and you started out your business, you will eventually find that you'll reach a point where you've got some working software, you've got some customers, you might be generating some revenues, but you're definitely nowhere near like hitting the big money mark, right? But you're onto something, right? You're onto something because what you've got is you've got a brand that is slowly establishing itself in the market. You've got tech that is constantly improving with actual feedback. And what you're doing is you're starting to get interest. You've got people who want to work with you. You've got people who want to work for you. And so it's at this point where you start to move to a pivot that says, from just starting out, I'm going to start to scale. And when you start to scale, there's a few dynamics that look different to when you're starting out. The first thing is you can only really scale if you've got good managers. All right. And this is not a point that I think is generally up for debate. It's actually something that is not, and it's also not anecdotal. I think if you do a lot of research on startups and how they achieve their growth, good management is essential. And what this means is you need people who are going to be able to galvanize teams to take them towards a vision, to actually achieving that vision. All right. And good managers come either experienced or they come experienced, but they also could come very expensive sometimes. And so at this point, you have to think as a business owner, how much of an investment is it for me to hire a good manager, so who can lead people, who can think about product strategy that allows me as the co-founder to get a bit more out of the detail, right? So that I can focus on, for example, say sales. So good managers are essential. Do not try and work around this. Do not try and just put, and I say this with respect actually, do not just try and put any technical person in a management role, right? You've got to be thoughtful about who you have as your managers. So as you scale, you get good managers, but then what you also find is you need to constantly juggle the process of supply and demand. And this is relevant for both services businesses as well as product businesses. So I'll give you an example. In our consulting business, which is, as I mentioned, the first pillar of our business model, we have to always think about how do we get deals with clients if we don't have the people already in the company? In other words, I've got a potential NLP project, and I know I need a data scientist who can do NLP, but I need to hire that person first before I can actually close the deal. But then there's no guarantee that the deal will be closed. So to a certain extent, you need to pre-finance hiring some people before you can actually guarantee the money to, say, pay for those people, right? And so this is where you have to be very clever as an entrepreneur, right? Over time, you'll develop a lot of intuition that helps you to assess the likelihood of deals converting. But essentially, you are constantly going to be playing this juggling act. The same goes on the product side, right? You will need to hire people who will help you to build your product. But if you don't have X number of customers using your product, you might not be making enough revenue to fund your business longer term. So as you scale, be aware that you're constantly going to have a juggling act between supply and demand. You then need to put in processes, right? You cannot work around this. And processes should not slow you down. That's the important thing to mention, right? You have to put some sort of processes, some level or granularity of processes in place to help your business to operate a lot more smoothly, right? So that people have a bit more direction on how to handle small things that you shouldn't get distracted with. For example, standardize your recruitment process, right? Standardize how you do deals and contracts with clients and how you pitch yourself to clients. Standardize things like payment terms with clients. Standardize how you check in with your employees regularly to make sure that they're all happy. If you don't put these processes into play, what you'll find is that as an entrepreneur, you'll be spending your time on the wrong things. And that ultimately becomes detrimental to everyone and everything in the company. So put processes in place, because without them, you can't scale. Too much process, however, is a dangerous thing, and you'll find that you actually lose a lot of speed. And then the next thing excuse me. The next thing is you need to now go back to the whole talent hiring process, right? And like I said, the people you hire initially are not necessarily the people you hire later on. And so what you have to think about very, very carefully is how do you attract talent and how do you retain talent? Okay, because your ability to scale is going to depend on those sort of incentives, your company culture. You have to think about how that is being crafted, because that's going to affect attraction and retention. All right. The way you use the financial resources of the company is going to help with attraction and retention. And so you might find that you want to start to, as you scale, hire a lot more senior people with, I don't know, 5 to 10 years of experience, people who typically come from corporates, because perhaps these people are going to help you to build your product out there and get it out much faster. So as you scale, you need to give serious thought to what are the hiring requirements that you have, as well as how do you retain the existing pool of talent that you have. And as you're scaling, if you're doing it right, what you're going to find is that people are going to start to wear less hats. All right. So that data scientist who was doing marketing, he was consulting, and then he was also doing a bit of software engineering. And for some reason, he was also trying to like manage a couple of employees. You'll find that he start to have found his or her niche, and they're perhaps doing a bit more directed and focused work. And so this would be a really good indicator to say that you're scaling in the right way because people are wearing less hats. So as you've been scaling, what you realize is you've come to a point where you're actually running a really impressive operation, right? You should have money flowing now. Your tech is starting to look beautiful. But what you're going to be encountering with more people and more clients or customers is you're going to encounter a lot of operational challenges. And this is, again, actually a healthy indicator that you are scaling. All right. And so I can't really talk too much about scale beyond this point, because this is actually like the interesting point where CapeAI is in their journey, which is you want to perhaps consider a bit of additional funding to truly scale, right? You want to start to put in a few management structures or layers within the company that's going to support fast growth, because you can't operate on that mentality of I'm a small company and I'm a startup. If you do that, you will never really grow. So this is sort of like where the recipe would take you, right? It'll take you to a point where you've got a business that's actually running, and from here onwards, you need to just find the right people who are going to help you to grow it further. And I think it's a lot of it might be rinse and repeat, but there's also lessons that I can't actually give visibility on at this point. So as I start to conclude my presentation, what I want to do is I want to give you all a heads up on a few things that I've learned, that we have learned actually, CapeAI, some quite painfully and some not so painfully. The first is being a good techie does not make you a good manager. All right. And so if you're thinking of starting a business and you think that you can manage people, you need to really ask yourself important questions that would assess whether you have that ability to manage people, because it's not the same as just being able to write good code. All right. So don't make the assumption that when you hire a good techie as well, that person's going to be a good manager. The second one, which I've touched on, is there's no point having great tech if you don't have customers. All right. And so the number one thing that you do not want to overlook in creating a startup is sales. Sales, 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 sales. All of your growth is going to come from sales and marketing, and much less from your tech, which is a common misconception amongst like technical founders. The third thing, and this was quite a painful lesson for us, is you're not a lawyer. Like, get help with financial and legal stuff. If you've got friends in that space, great. But if you need to go and actually just pay someone to help you to draw up good contracts, to review things like licenses and agreements, do it. This stuff here can bite you back and cost you a lot more money longer term if you don't spend on it early enough. The fourth thing is, as an entrepreneur and in turning a use case into a successful startup, you need to be comfortable with flux. People are going to come and go, and churn is a part of the game. And if you don't make yourself resilient and mentally prepared for this, you will be drained and burned out with this entrepreneurial process very quickly. Excuse me. Yeah, I've accidentally pressed too much. Sorry about that. The next thing that I want to touch on is the exercise of pricing is non-trivial, and you get to a point of pricing your products and your services through trial and error. So don't overthink it. Just do something, see how it works, and then change it up. As a founder, you always need to scenario plan, always, which means you constantly need to be thinking ahead. What if I lose my best employee tomorrow? What if I lose my biggest customer tomorrow? What if I run into $100 million tomorrow? How do I grow? Think about these things, because these thoughts are going to help you to be a lot more prepared for the unknown that is always there. And then the last thing, which if you take away nothing from my presentation besides this today, this should be your takeaway. Your most important financial metric is cash flow. Forget about the income statement and the balance sheet and all of those things. What you need to be interested is how much money there is in the bank to help your startup to be operational. Can you pay your employees? Can you basically facilitate your growth? And if you're doing that, that all comes from cash flow. And that is the last important point that I leave you with. And I just want to touch on a bit of a success story for us very quickly. The reason that I'm able to actually share this journey with you is because we've been able to successfully create 4 ventures that are all running as individual entities of their own today. 3 out of the 4 of them, with the exception of Moonshop, has actually received their own funding. They've got their own founding teams, they've got their own clients, and they built their own tech. And in the process, we've been able to create many, many jobs. And so this has been like a really difficult process, but it's been one of the most rewarding processes for me, as well as I'm pretty sure almost all CapeAI people people who are associated with CapeAI. So with that, thank you very much. And I hope this was a valuable presentation.
All right, thanks, Adit. So I'm going to take over at this point, folks. My name is Matt Lewis, and for now I will be a disembodied voice, though you will be able to hear or to see my face a little later when we have the panel discussion. So can somebody please confirm that you can see that?
We can see your screen, Matt.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeannie. So, as you can see, my talk this afternoon is entitled Academia to Industry, a Logic-Driven Pivot. And it's my hope that this will be of value to the students among you, perhaps postgrad students in particular, who are looking to move into their first jobs, and also those of you who are involved with hiring and viewing potential candidates coming from academia in a slightly different light. So I'm going to start with giving a description of my biological background. And by that, I don't mean my origins as a human being, but rather my choice of study after high school, which after quite a few years led me to doing this. I had studied biology. I did an undergrad in zoology and botany. I then did honors and moved into masters. And through those postgraduate years, I spent a lot of time out in the natural world looking at these chacma baboons. And I was taking notes on where they were going, what they were eating, how they were interacting with one another, and then analyzing these behaviors through quantitative analytics that led me to generating something like what you see here. So in the top right-hand corner, we have a representation of their movement patterns in space. That's down on the South Peninsula, for those of you who know this area, showing frequency of use of different areas. And then the lower visualization there is a representation of a model output showing the probability of these animals feeding on marine foods, so foods in the intertidal zone on the rocky shore, and how that relates to both tide height and swell height. And ultimately, as I said, after a good few years, this led me to being awarded my PhD in ecology. And you might be wondering how I ended up moving from ecology to the data science and AI world. Well, there was a little deviation along the way because I moved first into archaeology. So I did a postdoctoral research fellowship after my PhD, and again leveraged my quantitative analytics, specifically in reference to stable isotopes. And that might be a bit of a stretch for some of you, but it might be something you remember from undergrad chemistry or even even high school chemistry days. So I did this research fellowship. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I was still having a great time in the academic space. And from that postdoctoral fellowship, I moved onto a lecturing contract. And I spent 2 years at the University of Cape Town teaching in the biological sciences department. So I gave lectures for undergraduate degrees and also supervised and co-supervised postgraduate students. And after 2 years, I was coming to the end of my contract, and I realized that it actually might not be the space that I wanted to stay in long term. And so I found myself asking, what next? And at this point, following a little bit of an existential crisis, I had to assess what my options were. And I thought back to a conversation that I'd had that is referenced by the title of this slide, which is Just a Piece of Paper. And that conversation was with somebody at a braai, where he was asking me what I was doing and what I had studied. And I explained that to him. And I said, I'm not too sure what comes next, but I have skills, and I think I'll be able to find a good fit for myself. And his response to me was, well, you don't really have skills. You just have a piece of paper, which was a bit of a knock, I will admit. That wasn't something that I wanted or needed to hear, given the space that I was in. And so I stepped back and tried to decide whether or not this was the case. And I came to the conclusion that it wasn't. And this is something that I hope will be I think will be a positive thing, or hope will be a positive thing for the students among you, in that I realized that I did have skills. On the technical side, I had a really solid foundation in statistics, including both analysis and modeling capability. I had a good understanding of and experience in data visualization. I had learned to code because I did all of my analyses in R. And then I also was skilled in the MS Office space. And for those of you who might be thinking, well, that's not really applicable, I can assure you that depending on which space you end up with and who you end up interacting with in terms of your clients, whether that's in a consulting space or a startup space, I think that Office can actually come in quite handy. And then on the non-technical side, I had learned to engage in critical thinking. I could assess problems and come up with solutions in a way that made sense. I could leverage logic in that space. I had also developed communication skills, both written and verbal. I had learned about experimental design and pseudo-experimental design, which is perhaps more relevant in the world of industry. And I'd also engaged in project and stakeholder management. So for those of you who are doing postgraduate study, I expect you have some experience of this. You might not think of it as stakeholder management, for example, but working with a supervisor and a co-supervisor, possibly someone in industry who is engaged and invested in your project, means that you are actually gaining stakeholder experience along the way. And then finally, grit. And for those of you who are approaching the end of postgraduate degrees, I expect, or who have already finished degrees, you will know what I'm talking about. It's that ability to stick it out, to find a way, to find a solution. And so I now had these skills, and I started to work out how to sell those skills, and was successful enough that I managed to find a new beginning for myself. And this was at CapeAI, with those values of entrepreneurship, trust, excellence, and fun. And they took a bit of a gamble on me to some extent. I didn't have experience in this world, but I sold myself and I sold my skills, and they gave me a shot. And that's where I've been for the last 18 months. And this is not to say that I had all of the skills or all of the knowledge that I needed. Far from it, in fact. For one thing, I needed to learn the lingo. I needed to learn the startup lingo, the corporate lingo, the data science lingo. Because even though I had quantitative analytics experience, there are different sets of languages associated with these things in the data science and AI space. I also had to pick up various technical skills. I had to learn to code in Python. I had to learn to use the fundamental data science libraries that so many of us use on a regular basis. And I had to get to grips with DevOps. I had never heard of Git, let alone used it, before I left the academic space. And so over time, I added these pieces to my skill set puzzle. I had found my space at CapeAI, that first opportunity that I needed coming out of academia. I was in junior data scientist position at first, and I worked on client projects and internal projects and what I've somewhat ambiguously called other, which is a reference to those hats that Adit talked about. In this space, you're going to need to do all sorts of things, and that grit and that can-do attitude that you might be able to bring from your studies will stand you in good stead. And another example of this, one of these other projects, was an AI for wildlife project that I worked on earlier this year. And that was a great merging of my biological training and history together with the new world that I'd come into. And so that was also a really nice opportunity for me to leverage my skills. And it has been anything but a straightforward journey. It has felt at times like I've been stationary, or in fact, moving a little bit backwards, almost in reverse at times. And I have managed to hold on to those skills and that confidence in my ability to learn new things, with the result that now, 18 months down the line, I'm a data science delivery lead at CapeAI. I don't know what's going to come next, but I'm grateful for the skills I learned in academia and the way that I've been able to leverage them in industry. And so I encourage you not to sell yourselves short if you are looking to move in a similar way. And for those who are hiring, I encourage you to really look a little deeper at the candidates that you might be assessing and see what they really have to offer. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. I must apologize. I was actually supposed to introduce Matt at the end of my presentation, and then my throat went dry, so I needed to grab some water. But Matt's presentation is actually really important, linking up to what I had presented, because as he said, it really made us think about how the types of people you hire early on versus later on can be very different. And so Matt came completely left field in terms of industry, but he's really like taken ownership of his position with like so gracefully, and he's adding so much value, and he's on this path that is non-linear but exponential and going exactly where he wants it to go, as well as where we want to take it. And so in line with our theme of turning a machine learning use case into a successful startup, having covered this interesting like hiring story from Matt, I now want to hand over to Byron Mitchell, who is actually someone who's quite instrumental in crafting the CapeAI brand and marketing it today. So Byron, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm actually speaking from Benjamin's computer because we're in the boardroom in the office together. So I'll be sharing my slides now, and please let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, it's there, Byron.
Amazing. Thanks, Adit. Okay, so my topic that I'm going to be speaking on today is branding yourself for success. It sounds like an interesting one to get into, and it's going to be broken down into a couple of key parts. I'm going to take a look firstly at how you can brand your business and set that up for success. And on top of that, I'm going to take a look at how a student entering the industry can try and brand themselves to help get a job, move to a new job if they are someone working in the industry already. So that's what we're going to be covering today. I'll give a quick background on myself before I get into this, and it'll sort of tail off Matt's presentation. I come from a completely different background to most people. I come from a creative media background and came from media content creation, film content creation, sound content creation. So stepping into the tech space and moving into a sales role here originally was a big step, but a nice adjustment for me. And as I've gone through, Adit mentioned, you'll wear multiple hats. So at the moment, I handle B2B sales as well as handling marketing and occasionally some recruiting. So definitely wearing a lot of hats and finding where I want to position myself. But moving on, when you approach the talk about branding, most people would always just assume it's your logo. With Nike, Adidas, all of those, the thing you think of their brand is their logo, but there's a lot more that goes into it. There's a message behind that. There's a story, and they all try to share that and get it across in the most clear way with their advertisements and everything that they put out in their products. CapeAI, as Adit mentioned earlier, we use our values to align everything that we put out. We make all of our decisions based off our values. We make every piece of marketing content that goes out has to pass a small test where we see if it aligns with our values, if it shares the message that we're looking to share. And if it does, then it goes out and it's all cleared. Moving on to my next slide. Is this relevant to me? As a student entering the working world, or as a business in the tech space, you may think, is it even necessary to really brand myself or try and set myself up in this space and really explain it? It really is. In the startup environment, everyone that is in your team is part of your brand. They carry your branding, they carry your message, and they are the people that will be seen first when people look at your company. They are also going to be the first contact points that get your content out there. Them sharing and liking your content will put it in front of their immediate network, and that's going to get your content to go further. But on an individual side, you have to have a strong personal brand to be able to get in touch with future bosses or to get yourself into your next job that you may need to get into. And there's a couple of ways to do this, and I'm going to address them a little bit later on. But the first thing I want to do as a fun little activity is give everyone the opportunity to scan this QR code that I have on the screen. And this is going to take you to your LinkedIn SSI score. And your SSI score is basically a breakdown of the 4 categories you can see on the screen. And it's quite a useful tool when you're explaining to sales teams and trying to get them to figure out how well they do in the sales environment. So I'm going to move to the next slide where I've actually shared my own personal SSI index. And I'm not perfect. I'm definitely not there yet, but it's something that we always work towards and we're trying to improve. As you can see on the screen, I have an SSI index of 64, which is good. You're always looking to be over 75 if you're wanting to be in the best range of this. LinkedIn will actually push profiles that are over 75% harder when they post. It'll get their posts more reach and more engagement. So you always want to be over that number. And the ways to do this are quite simple. On the first element, the establish your professional brand, you need to have a full profile, make sure that nothing is missing, get people to endorse you and tell them what skills you have. These are all really important elements. And the second part is finding the right people. You need to be able to use the advanced search terms on LinkedIn, use Boolean search terms, use filtering, advanced filtering to try and narrow down the people that you're talking to. Don't just spray and pray connection requests out there and hope that you're building your network efficiently, because you're really not. I learned this the hard way when I started out on LinkedIn, and I'm still trying to get it back under control. The third element with engaging with insights, the key part of this is interact. Always like and comment on people's posts, chat to them, ask them interesting questions, share posts that you find insightful. These all go a long way to helping your personal brand, because it shows on your page after that. All really important. They may not seem like it in the beginning, but in the long run, you'll start to see the benefits of this. And then the last area is based on your total number of connections. This is how many people you have and the seniority of those people. Having higher ranked people in your list of connections pushes this level up and gives you a better score. So if you have CEOs, CTOs in your connection list, you're going to have a higher score on this part. These may not seem very important if you look at them as a simple thing because they are focused on sales, but they really are. If you can hit some of these and make sure that you've got a good score on this, you're doing the right things, you're setting yourself up for success later on, you're making sure that you are getting your content from the right people and that you're networking really well. Moving on to my next slide, I just want to put together a couple of quick tips to explain how you can maximize on this, and just small things that you can do every day to make sure that you're effectively growing your network. Connect with one meaningful person a day. It seems simple, but it goes back to the spray and pray thing I spoke about earlier. You don't want to send out 50 connection requests a day. Firstly, LinkedIn's going to block you for that. You're not allowed to do that anyway. But if you're connecting with one meaningful person a day, having an interesting conversation with them and actually taking that further, you're creating a lot more value than if you just opened and connected with 30 people straight off the bat. The second part, leave comments. I say 4 to 10, but this is up to you and what you're comfortable with. Chat to people, ask a good question, ask about anything that you want about their company. Just start a conversation and speak to people, because they remember it later on. These things come back and help you. Post at least twice a week. This seems like a funny one, and it can be quite daunting for someone who's new to LinkedIn and new to sharing content. Put out anything. It could be an article that you read that you found interesting, or it could be an article that you've written. It could be a picture with a poll. Anything that you want, get your word out there and start sparking conversations, because it makes a huge difference. You don't need to spend all day on this. Spend 10 to 15 minutes a day, 20 if you've got the spare time. But just give up that little bit of time every day and it'll go a long way. It really pays off in the end. And this is an important one. I've highlighted it in green, but keep it authentic. You don't want to come across as a person who's just trying to build their network so that they have a big connection number. You know, as soon as you've got 500 plus connections, they're going to hire me because they know I have lots of people in my network. It doesn't work like that. So make sure you're having authentic conversations. Find out about the person you're speaking to. Have a genuine, interesting conversation and really get to know them. This will go a long way. How do I get in touch with the right person? This is a slide I wanted to put in just so that I could give you a little cheat sheet if you're overwhelmed by the whole process. Decide who you want to target as the first step. You know, decide what level of person you're looking for, whether it's a CEO or a CTO. Find out who that person is, and then use the advanced search terms on LinkedIn and the advanced search features that LinkedIn provides you with to get in touch and really narrow it down to a specific group of people. Interact with 2 pieces of content. Once you've connected with these people, interact with their content, like it, comment on it. This will throw your name up in front of them, they'll remember it, and when you message them at a later stage, it'll help them. And then that moves on to a later one. Send a customized connection request. When you send that connection request out to them, put a message with it, because it's easier to send a blank connection request, and it's also easy to reject a blank connection request. And just keep it authentic. If you put a genuine reason why you're interested in speaking to that person and what benefit it could provide them, they're more likely to accept you into their network. Those are pretty much my quick tips to growing your network, and I'll just thank you for listening to me today. Throw any questions that you may have into the question bar, and we'll address them in the panel discussion after.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Byron. So I must just share with you all a very funny thing, right? So before Byron had actually joined CapeAI, myself, Peter, and a few others in the company had actually been in this this random journey of trying to figure out what's the best way to market ourselves. And organically, it seemed to have been working. But ever since Byron came in, he's brought a lot more structure and actually started to bring in the science behind it. And that's an important thing for us to mention, that if you want to turn an idea into a successful business, then one of the things you need to do is you need to look at the numbers, you need to look at the facts, you need to look at the data. And so your marketing and branding is something that actually has science and art to it. And if you don't know how to do it, then go and do the research or find the people who can do it. So thanks a lot, Byron. Our next speaker is someone who's also, like Matt, been on a very interesting journey of like accelerated growth with CapeAI. And her name is Simone, and Simone's going to be talking to us about the simple secrets to data quality. I won't say any more. Simone, take it away.
Thanks, Adit. So, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Thanks.
Simone, do you need help sharing?
Jeannie, is it not sharing?
Yeah, I'm not seeing your screen right now. We did see your screen earlier.
Okay, 1 second.
Okay, Simone, we're seeing your slides tab now. I think if you just put it in presentation mode.
Okay, can you see it?
There we go. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. Okay, so if you guys can see on the slide, this is just a general schema of the general industry process. And when we're in academia, we tend to really hone into the bottom part of this process. And that's just because academia focuses on training researchers in upskilling their domain knowledge, as well as really focusing on the how and why of machine learning algorithms and how to really improve our models' results. However, even though we're well versed at the end of this process, when we take a step into industry, we tend to be quite elementary at the beginning of the process, and this is often quite a crucial step. So for example, we really need to understand the business problem that we're trying to solve before we deep dive into the modeling. And this just because whether we're working on a client project or creating a product, we want to make sure that we are creating value in whether it's our project or product. The next thing we need to do is either to extract our data from a data warehousing tool and then do some exploratory data analysis to get a better feel for our data. And it's during this step where we may encounter some unforeseens. For example, we will have sufficient amounts of data. And a possible way to work around this is you can either curate your own data by building a minimum viable product and putting that product in the hand of the user and generating data, or you could crowdsource your labeled data. The next challenge we may run into is that is our data labeled, is labeling our data. And so we can either have an in-house data labeling solution, which is quite advantageous if we know we'll have consistency labeling through all our data sets, as well as predictable results. However, it would take quite a lengthy period of time. Or we could outsource it or crowdsource it, but then the quality of our data may be in question. And so to just really highlight that point, if you look at this diagram lower to the left, where we have that green square highlighting the wolf, as you move towards the right, you can see how inconsistencies of when people have labeled data, just because data labeling is quite a manual task. So you can see how those inconsistencies can slowly creep ways into our data. And then we also have to ensure that during the step when we've outsourced our data to be labeled, that we don't introduce any biases into our data. And this brings me to my next slide, where we have to take biases into account. So the first bias we need to be aware of is sample bias. And this is just when our input data isn't an accurate representation of the environment. So let's say, for example, our goal is to create a model that can operate security cameras both at nighttime and daytime, but we only train it on the daytime data. So obviously the quick fix to this is to make sure that our training set both has nighttime and daytime data. But it's also important that we include a sufficient amount of data for both the day and nighttime data. The next bias tends to occur more frequently, and this is just because we exclude features from our data set during the pre-processing step. So for example, let's imagine we have a data set of customer sales in the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape for a tech company. But because 98% of customers are from the Western Cape, we choose to delete the location data thinking it's irrelevant. However, this means our model will not pick up on a potential insight, such as the fact that our Eastern Cape customers might spend twice as more than our Western Cape customers. The last bias, which is prejudice bias, tends to be the one that's most well documented in the media. And this is often just a result of cultural influences and stereotypes. So for example, let's imagine we've created a model for an HR team within our tech company to identify the best candidate for a software engineering role. And because our model has been fed thousands of training data, where generally the majority of our candidates who've had a technical coding background are male, compared to the majority of females who are in our training data set have had backgrounds more in administrative roles. The algorithm is going to likely learn to associate males to the software engineering role, given the biases it's been fed. And so when a model like this is in production, not only does our AI ethics get questioned, but so does our product. Our product becomes to be in a very vulnerable space, because if our customers are starting to question our data integrity, our product tends to lose its value. And so then this leads us to what regulations do we need to be aware of? And if we're operating within a South African market, we need to be aware of the South African POPI Act. And if we're operating within a European market, we need to be aware of the GDPR Act. And so, for example, Moonshop, which is both POPI Act compliant and GDPR compliant, when our customers sign up to the Moonshop app, the app prompts them to consent to being recorded when they're in store. And we also have to ask for permission to send them emails. Last but not least is the data prep step. So we all know that saying that dirty data in is dirty data out. And this is just because we can't rely on the results as they'll lead us to false conclusions. Other problems with dirty data is the incorrect data types, lack of uniqueness, as well as improper cross-field dependencies. So some key takeaways is that we need to understand the problem you're trying to solve before you deep dive into modeling. Not understanding your data can introduce a loss of technical debt, and interactions with clients generate data, so you can create this feedback loop for improving your products as you go along, and account for biases that could potentially be in your data set. And last but not least, data cleaning is essential. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Simone. So just so that you all understand a bit of context here, right? The reason that we thought we'd want to feature a lightning talk around data quality is because the success of your startup, again, whether it's services or a product business, is so heavily dependent on the type of data you're working with, how you work with that data, and then ultimately the quality of that data. And so it's very important in a machine learning context specifically that this is something that you as a founder or an employee in a startup, like do not lose visibility of this importance. So thank you very much, Simone. We're going to move on to our final lightning talk before we take a 5-minute break. And this next talk is going to be handled by Benjamin Sturgeon, who's a machine learning engineer at CapeAI. And Benjamin's going to touch on a very, very important thing that's close to our heart, which is about how values actually drives everything that we've been doing. Ben, over to you.
Cool, thanks, Adit. Back to the beginning. Cool, so my talk today is, as Adit said, about how values drive projects. And my context for coming to this or doing this talk is having worked on the Moonshop for the last year or so as a software engineer and data scientist. And I had a number of conversations with Matthew Lewis, whose presentation you saw earlier. And we came to the conclusion that more than anything else, the values and the principles that we derive from those values are what really help to steer us in the right direction continuously throughout the project. So let's jump right into it. So here we have some pictures of the Moonshop, and the reason I feature these here is just as a way of showing you kind of the environment that we ended up building. And it ended up in this really, really nice place, but there are a number of challenges along the way, and it was a significant technical and emotional challenge to finally get to this place. So how did we actually manage to get from A to B to C to Z in this case? In my experience, it was clear that technical prowess was less valuable or less important than our values and principles. And obviously technical prowess is incredibly important, but the values and principles that we had are what allowed us to make the right decisions and come back to our guiding principles throughout this project. And a nice quote to sum this idea up is, it doesn't really matter how fast you're going if you're heading in the wrong direction. A quote by Stephen Covey, the writer of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And yeah, that sums it up, because your technical prowess is essentially how quickly you can set up the project and have it build your beautiful tech stack. But if you're not making the right product, or you're not thinking about the right things as you're building it, you're going to end up in the wrong place. So how do values and principles really work in this kind of environment? To me, it seems like they have this kind of pyramidal structure where your values inform your principles, and your principles inform your strategy, which in turn inform your ways of working, and your ways of working are kind of your day-to-day, like how do we assign work to different people in the team? How do we structure our Git pulls? How do we, what do we prioritize in our code? Is it cleanliness? Is it just speed? How does that work? And then finally, those ways of working come down to your day-to-day, like typing in the code that is going to be your final product. And each of those things has to come at the end of the day from your values. So your values can either be poorly defined or completely unknown and end up being quite detrimental, or you can really get very clear with them and come together as a group to decide exactly how those values, what they are and what those values actually mean. So in the case of CapeAI, our values are entrepreneurship, fun, excellence, and trust. And just a quick metaphor to bring this point home. The technical day-to-day is like the whole car. That's your project, that's your team, and that's what gets you there in the end. But your values and principles are like the fuel that are the power and the emotional force that drives that team. So that's what keeps them on the right path and what leads them towards that final destination you're looking for. So our first core value that we're going to be looking at is that of excellence. So how did excellence actually impact our working on the project? So from the beginning, we try to optimize the user and client experience. We would constantly go and say, how is this feature going to impact our clients? Or how is this, like, what do we need to do in order to make sure that the user is having the best possible time with our technology that we've built? And a very important thing for us was we needed to make sure that the baskets that we were going to be creating in our autonomous shop, the Moonshop, how we were going to make sure that those baskets were always going to be correct, so that we could avoid having a user have an incorrect basket, which would be a very distressing experience. And also that the basket would be delivered quickly, and so they wouldn't have to worry about if the technology was actually working or not. So we would have to constantly go and seek feedback from both our users and the potential clients, the people like Wellness Warehouse and Checkers, who we ended up partnering with. So another important value, a critical value, was that of entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship played a massive role in our work, both in breaking down the problem, because at first we didn't have the ability to say, here is our wonderful autonomous shop. It would be a massive jump to just start straight into building a shop and having it have customers go in and out and buying stuff. So we had to break down the problem into a smaller version of that. We created a miniature Moonshop inside our office that you could have a customer essentially walk in, take something off the shelf and have the cart built to them, but in a very sort of elementary way. And by doing that, we could have demonstrations of the technology and show that we had the essential concept working. And through doing that, Wellness Warehouse were eventually interested after our demo with them and were willing to take it further with us. And through that, we ended up being able to launch our first shop. So here's a picture of that first early demonstrations that we'd built. And as you can see, we've got a little model running there to show the items and customer coming into the shop. But it was really like as rudimentary as it gets. So we found that having this entrepreneurial way of constantly both trying to build and sell at the same time led to fantastic results. So both having lots and lots of different clients who we were pitching the product to, who would say like, oh, but does this solve this problem? Because that's the kind of thing that we would be interested in. Because we would solve their problem as well as another client who had a totally different set of problems. it helped us to build a much more robust solution, and also to identify the things that this wasn't going to be solving. Also, by pitching to clients, you get the insight of industry professionals, and you also have access to those as resources, and they can say like, oh yeah, but this little feature you've built here doesn't make any sense, or oh yeah, this page isn't structured the right way. And that way you're basically getting free, like top quality input on your product. This also forced us to raise our standards, because often the clients would have expectations of certain things that we didn't think were that important, but which they thought were very critical. And as we were rising to match those expectations, we ended up building a stronger and better product in the end. And finally, having skin in the game makes a huge difference. So having people who actually are relying on your thing working properly for them means you can't just have a shoddy, disorganized operation. You really need to keep things slick so that your client is constantly happy. And yeah, that's a huge motivator. The value of trust is also incredibly important. So it flowed in one direction, which is, as engineers, we would need to trust that our leadership team was keeping the stakeholders' expectations within the bounds of reality, as well as making sure that they would be fighting for us and making sure that we would have the time that we needed to do the work that was necessary. And on the other hand, the team lead would also need to trust in the engineers to say, I know that these my people are going to be making the code as high quality as possible and would be reliably finishing the work. So yeah, some of the benefits of that trust, it kept us stressed at a minimal level because we knew that we would have the time that we needed to get the work done. And it also made sure that we always had that time, which meant that the code base always managed to be in a healthier state than it otherwise would be. It's very easy for a code base to get into a very sloppy state, and once it does, it's quite difficult to get it back to a healthy place. So if you can keep it clean the whole time, you'll be a much happier person. So yeah, having that work environment of knowing that we were safe and that we could do good work help us put our heart and souls into the work. And finally, the value of fun. So without fun, the whole thing would have been a much more depressing process. So fun isn't something that just naturally appears, although it can. But I find that it's really something you have to put some work into finding, and you have to really guard and grab it. So we found fun during the morning stand-ups when we would banter as a group and just enjoy each other's company, but also in more deliberate events like a camp that we went on, or team building events where we were in bouldering, or like lunches that we would have in the office together, and other things like hiking with co-workers, just having meetups and going to have breakfast or whatever together, and other things like sporting events. So at the end of the day, there's no substitute for spending time with the people that you care about. But yeah, values do cut both ways, and we found that, to me, the lesson of how important values was really came when we deviated from the values, and very, very quickly we would find ourselves being punished for having done that. So, for example, there was one time when stakeholders had a bit too much sway in exactly how our deadlines were going to be structured, and this had massive consequences to our code quality and also to our general happiness and state of mind. So this was essentially a conflict in our values. How do we make sure we can deliver on the excellence of our product, make sure that it's done in time, but also have that trust in each other to make sure that this state of affairs is going to end, essentially. And I think it resolved itself because we did have that trust, and eventually we were able to rein in the stakeholders a bit and get to a better place. So in the end, the problem was resolved by continuing to stick to our original values. So the final realizations and final takeaways. This idea of the fourth industrial revolution of AI involving everything and IoT is is a great thing, and I think we're all here to celebrate that. But the fifth industrial revolution is the reintroduction of people and emotions back into the work that we're trying to do. And to me, that's going to be the most important revolution of all. Another important point, the compassion that we had for the clients and for each other and for our users was critical in knowing what we were trying to do. Having compassion for the experience of users, making sure that they didn't have to try and wait in queues all the time, was the problem that we were trying to solve. And having compassion for clients to say, oh, they shouldn't have to have this annoying experience. We can make this easier by adding this feature to the dashboard or helping them to onboard more easily. All of those things come from compassion and from understanding the perspective of the other person. And finally, in a world driven by technology, human emotions are still the most important thing in the world. And at the end of the day, are the things that drive everything that we're doing. So yeah, that's my talk. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. So to tie up everyone, like I think Ben's presentation really sums up what CapeAI is about, but also it really sums up what this journey about entrepreneurship should be, right? Which is it should be a values-driven journey. And so essentially at CapeAI, what we've done is we've been very deliberate and conscious about driving values at the root of this company when it was started, and workshopping a lot of these things, getting everyone to ask themselves difficult questions, and then conversing about it so that we're all on the same page and that we're working towards the same things. And it might seem very fluffy, but I can almost guarantee you that this fluffiness is what leads to commercial success, which is why most people start businesses in the first place. So thank you very much to all of the speakers. And without further ado, we are going to break for a little while and we will reconvene at 3:30. So that gives us about an 8-minute break. And then we'll move into the panel discussion, which will be moderated by Matt. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you all in 8 minutes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We will be reconvening now.
Alrighty, thank you very much, everybody. I hope that you're all back and ready to get into this. I see we have some great questions to get started. Adit, are you able to turn your camera on, or is that not possible at this point?
My camera is on, but I think my network is struggling, so that's why you're not seeing me.
Okay. Okay.
I can actually see you, Adit.
Oh, okay. I guess it's just on my side. No problem.
Maybe it's just for some people.
Yeah. All right. So starting off with a multi-part question that I think will be of interest to a good number of people. I'll throw the whole question out there, and then we can unpack it piece by piece. So this is from Merelda, and the question is, are there any AI startup groups in South Africa or Africa? Once we have bootstrapped enough and have a proof of concept or MVP, where and from whom do we start seeking funding? Venture capital in South Africa is so rare. How do we approach the funding problem? So I think that could be for anybody on the panel. And I suppose the fundamental question there is, how do we approach the funding problem? Where do we look for funding?
I suppose I can take a stab at this one here, right? Merelda, that's a great question, and I wish I had a very clear answer to you, because if we knew how to solve the funding problem, we would have had solved a lot of our issues already. Well, not issues, but challenges. So firstly, like you're right, the funding in South Africa is quite difficult to come by. But having said that, there are quite a few venture capital firms. I'm forgetting all of their names just off the top of my head, but something to check out is, for example, HAVAC. I think it's HAVAC. HAVAC Partners. Check out another group called Calon Ventures. So there are like a few more and more like VC firms that are coming into the play in the South African market. But yes, they are still very hard to come by. You mentioned about like community groups and things like that. To be honest, I'm actually not aware of any of those, although I think that when it comes down to like the funding game, you really just got to put yourself out there. Yeah, NASPA's Foundry are huge, and they make some really significant investments. So it's yes, funding is hard to come by, but it's not that it's not there. I think you just got to do a bit of digging, and you'll be able to find a lot of like VCs who are out there. Peter, our CEO, who's like commenting in the chats, I'm sure could give some more guidance there as well.
Yeah, I don't think we can pull up Peter. Unfortunately, we are full on the screen. But yeah, I think I don't know too much about the funding part. But I think if you start reaching out and building your network, like Byron said, that's the best way to get started, and also just getting more familiar with the funding environment. Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else on the panel who'd like to have a go at answering that one?
I mean, it's you should probably also not only limit yourself to seeking for capital in South Africa. If you beforehand know it's a problem, it might be worth considering, setting up your business entities in countries that are more, that have more venture capital opportunities, or just getting it from international sources, even if you are registered in South Africa.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Abdi.
And if I could just add one other thing, I think it's also important to like ask yourself, like, is venture capital funding what you're after, or do you also maybe want to get a bit of like debt funding, right? So the debt equity question is something that you should really consider before you go straight to assuming that VC funding is where you want to get your money. Because if it comes down to like debt funding, then I think the banks in South Africa are all more than ready to actually give people loans. And over and above that, they're all starting a lot of like incubation type programs to support small businesses.
Cool. Thanks, Adit. Marilda, I hope that answered your question. And if not, or if you'd like more, please feel free to post further comments in the chat box. Then I think I'm going to go for this one next.
Matt,
Yes,
sorry
sir.
to interrupt you.
Yep.
Maybe we could just do a quick roundtable of introductions so that everyone knows who's on the panel.
Of course. Apologies. Yes, please do. Panelists, please do a quick introduction, and let's keep it fairly short. But go ahead, Jeannie, let's start with you.
Cool, thanks, Matt. Yeah, I'm a data scientist at CapeAI. I specialize in NLP. I did my master's in applied mathematics, and also just really passionate about the Indaba𝕏 and deep learning Indaba community. So yeah, this year I had the opportunity to help organize the Indaba, and yeah, it's been a great experience. And yeah, just really also super proud of the team that we have here that put together everything and participating on the panel. Krista, I'll hand over to you.
Krista,
I can work a computer, I swear.
There we go.
Cool. Hi, my name is Christo. I studied at Stellenbosch back in the day. I did a master's in E&E with some applied work in machine learning. And then since then, I've been involved in a number of industry verticals, mostly in applied machine learning, a little bit of research. And yeah, I'm just super amped to be at CapeAI. I'm kind of a little bit new here, and so far really enjoying the journey. Byron.
Awesome. I gave a brief description of my role at CapeAI in my previous one, but I'll just run through it again quickly. My technical title is a sales and marketing consultant, but I handle marketing as well as a bit of recruiting and B2B sales at CapeAI. And that's my main role. I come from a background in creative media, so film content creation and audio content creation, as well as a bit of marketing in my past. I'll hand over to Aubrey.
Thanks, Byron. Hello, everyone. My name is Aubrey. I am the VP of Engineering at Moonshop. I have a background in physics. I did my master's at the University of Pretoria. I joined CapeAI about 2 years ago, and yeah, I worked on mainly computer vision projects in the company. Since March last year, I've been working on what is now Moonshop. Back then, we called it Frozen Bites, because we thought it was a bit hard to find decently priced ready-made frozen meals in South Africa. So we decided to make this autonomous freezer, and it had an electromagnetic lock that you would unlock using facial recognition, and you can take whatever meal you want out of the fridge and just walk out and be billed automatically. But yeah, we built that in 3 months, so we decided to aim a bit higher. So we collaborated with a local retailer to set up a small little store in our office, and we built Moonshop there. Yeah, and I don't know if all of you know, but we already have a Moonshop open in Greenpoint in the Ideas Cartel, a wellness warehouse one, and there's also one in Brackenfell, and we're opening another store in Switzerland next month, actually. Exciting times. And yeah, I think you also did do an introduction in your chat. So back to Matt, or do you?
Cool, thanks, Abri. Adit, did you want to say anything?
No, I was going to skip my introduction. Co-founder, CTO, CapeAI, Moonshop.
Right,
Thanks.
and I am a delivery lead and the moderator who forgot to do the introductions for the panel discussion. So let's go back to the questions. And I found this one particularly interesting from Zanele. Which option is best? As someone who is non-technical, would you recommend finding a co-founder who is technically competent or self-teaching machine learning to build a minimum viable product? I think that could be for Adit. Go ahead and start. Looks like you're keen.
Okay, sure. Matt, can you just repeat the question once more, please?
Sure thing. Which option is best? As someone who is non-technical, would you recommend finding a co-founder who is technically competent or self-teaching machine learning to build a minimum viable product?
That's a good question, Zanelia. So someone who's self-teaching, I'm going to make the assumption then that they're not as technically competent as what you want to compare it to, right? I would be hesitant against that. But it also depends on the complexity of what you guys are trying to build. So I suppose if what you're trying to build is quite technically complex, then having a co-founder who's sort of learning and figuring it out, then that's fine. But overall, my answer would actually be no. Like, you should go for a technically competent co-founder. And the reason I say this is because your business is a lot more than just the MVP. Your business is about that MVP and the scale thereafter. And so if this person's on this self-learning journey, without taking away anything from their learning path and ability, what you want is you want to be able to tick those other elements. Like a really competent technical co-founder is someone who's going to think about how your tech can scale, what sort of infrastructure you're looking at, what sort of people do you hire, right? The technical co-founder is not just someone, they will influence your hiring decisions. And so I would say, like, when it comes down to co-founders, don't look for a quick win. Look for people who have the right skills. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I think so. Is there anybody else on the panel who'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think you also, when you're looking for your co-founder, I think you should also just not just stop at like technical competence, but they should still, fit with the criteria that Adit explained, which was, do they pass the integrity test? You don't just want to add the first like strong technical person you meet and add that person to your team, because that might like bite you in the butt down the line as well. So maybe hold out for like the person you trust that also fits the box for like the technical co-founder.
Great, thanks, Jeannie. Then I think this would be perhaps a good one for Abri. How did you balance short-term revenue generating work versus building products? Any advice on switching from consulting to product? Because I know that you have done a bit of both along the way.
So I think this question actually relates more to on the company side. So how does the company switch from consulting to building products? And again, I think that's one better suited for Adit, because I've been mainly working on the products as opposed to managing the distribution between the two.
Sorry, my network is struggling. Matt, can you please repeat the question?
Sure. Also, Abri, I guess I thought that I'm thinking back to earlier days when you were jumping between things more. So Adit, the question is, how did you balance short-term revenue generating work, consulting, versus building products? Any advice on switching from consulting to product building?
Yeah, I think this one is actually quite a straightforward, simple answer in our context. You need to pay bills. Consulting was part of least resistance for that. And so that's why we had started out with consulting. When consulting had actually started to take a bit of a dip and slow down because of COVID, we then had to ask ourselves, okay, how do we redirect our efforts? And so we were fortunate to still maintain a bit, like some consulting work. And so we thought that, okay, the play that we want to get into that's a bit more reliable and less prone to, like, let's say, like market effects as much as consulting is the products business. And so that's when we made the decision to switch from being a purely consulting business to a consulting and venture business. So yeah, just to reiterate, consulting is part of least resistance. It'll bring in money. If you can do the work, you will guarantee the work, you'll guarantee the money. And then that money is what helps you to fund everything else. And so if you think you've reached the point of either getting bored or this thing not being, your consulting not being sustainable, or you've got enough money, that's when you want to consider the switch to a venture business, a product business.
Yeah, I know. I think there's also benefits in having people do consulting as well. You get to upskill them, and being exposed to industry also gives you the opportunity to see what are the problems that people are facing. So, Krista, I think the projects you've been working on really speaks to that as well.
Oh, Byron. So yeah, I think from my point of view, what happens often in a technology company is you have the ability to give advice and to make things for people. So the consulting move makes a lot of sense in the beginning, and that helps you build up a runway. And if you are careful with that runway, you can leverage it to spin out products and startups and things like that that form out of the core service that you're offering. But it's a difficult balance. You also need to consider that you need venture capitalist funding to try and boost that. And these are like conversations that only really evolve once you understand the setting that you're working in.
Thanks, Jeannie and Christo. Then moving on to the next question, we have, what are the challenges in scaling? And it sounds like there are a good few people in the audience who are grappling with this. That is moving beyond just being a startup. Tricky one. I'm looking forward to the answers here. And I think anyone on the panel can chip in.
Sure. Can I chip in for this one? So there's usually what you can think of as 3 phases. You have your proof of concept phase, which some people even just consider an elevator pitch. You then have that basically fold out into a minimum viable product phase. And then from there, if it looks like the market is actually consuming this thing that you've made, you then go into a production sort of grade system that you put out there that you do small iterative changes on. But going from each different stage requires, from a technical side, the ability to manage your technical debt that you build up, because you want to run fast, but also make clean code. And then there's also the opportunities you have to try and stagger in for if you're growing the team. How do you get those clients in to support the cash flow that you need to grow that team? And that is like a crazy balancing act that's quite stressful. It's definitely fun. I mean, Adit can definitely speak to this more than I can.
Yeah, I think the glaring one, as Christo mentioned, if you think about it with your technical hat on, is like technical debt is going to grow. And contrary to popular belief, there's never the right time to actually prune your technical debt. It'll continuously grow. You'll cut it down. It'll grow again. You'll cut it down. That's the way software development goes. But beyond that, like I think my talk touched on a bit of this, right? Like challenges to scaling. Number one is just managing more people, right? You would be shocked at how much like time and effort it takes to manage people. And when I say manage people, I mean, how do you check in to see if everyone's well-being is doing, like everything's good? You got to constantly be dealing with, I don't know, disputes amongst employees or people that are unhappy about certain things. You'll have people who come to you with suggestions, which is fantastic, but then sometimes you're sitting with literally a list of suggestions, and as a company, you need to prioritize. So there's a lot of like these operational challenges that come up with scaling, and it's largely driven by people. The second thing is then on the customer side, as I touched on in my talk, like juggling supply and demand is a huge challenge when it comes to scaling, because if you've got more customers using your product needs to be able to deal with that. So then it's scaling your tech, but it's also scaling back office operations. I'll give you an example. As Moonshop starts to grow and we get, I don't know, hypothetically, 10,000 shoppers a day, and of those 10,000, we've got 10% of them who are logging disputes in their bills. you need to now deal with 1,000 disputes a day. And it's not your technical team that are doing that. You've got to hire the operations and back office support for that. So as you start to scale, your business becomes a lot more than just about the technology. And so your challenges to me are largely operational.
And also culture. Like, yeah, I think we at CapeAI, we've got a really, really great culture. But keep that while you're scaling up is actually quite hard, because there's like, you know, there's like the critical size of a company when it kind of starts to become a corporate, and you need 5 levels of management, and you kind of lose that that trust structure and that like that really fun structure that we have. So that's a challenge.
Maybe just a last one on the challenges of scaling. One that I found interesting on the technical side is
to account for in scaling a scope creep as well, trying to make sure that you don't satisfy unnecessary components that could easily be added by clients that have differing ideas on what exactly it is that they want, trying to carve out what exactly the market is really wanting and focus on that. Otherwise, scope creep creates crazy amounts of technical debt, which become a nightmare.
Aubrey, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, just another challenge in scaling from your technical team is gonna stay the same, but you're gonna, once you have really clients that are scaling, you're gonna have to find a way to balance being able to deliver the product to your clients, but also being able to develop the product further, because your MVP, your product that you're selling to these first clients is not the product that you have in your mind. It's not this amazing thing that's gonna become something really big. So it's really challenging to balance between delivering the product and keeping the client happy, and also developing the product further.
Yeah, good point. Thanks all. Then there's a question that's had quite a few upvotes, which is tell us a little bit more about the 4 AI ventures started at CapeAI. For those who want to know who want to go deep there, I have actually posted links to the websites of those 4 ventures. But what I'm going to do is ask Byron to give us a bit of an elevator pitch about Moonshop, which is one of those 4 ventures. And that name's been mentioned a bunch of times. And Adit has said it's in his talk earlier, he gave a very, very brief summary. So I'm going to hand over to Byron to give us a little bit more detail on that.
Great. I think this is actually a perfect time to give a Moonshop elevator pitch, because I've been doing demos for Moonshop constantly for the past couple of days. So this is perfect timing for that. Moonshop is essentially our autonomous shopping platform that we've developed. Moonshop enables a retailer to open a store that has no cashiers, no checkouts, and no queues. Essentially, you scan in with your cell phone with a QR code that is there. The boom opens, you walk in, you take whatever products you'd like to take off the shelves, and then you leave. That's the full shopping experience that you have at Moonshop. It seems a little bit crazy to people experiencing it for the first time, and a lot of customers will say that it feels like they're stealing and things like that, but it's a really incredible concept to see coming to life, and a lot of people have had a huge amount of interest. It is very similar to Amazon Go, and we take a lot of inspiration from them, and we're hoping to grow a platform that is equally incredible.
Great, thanks, Byron. And then the other 3 ventures to which Adit referred are Enlabeler, Autoscriber, and Knowledge Marker. And we have people who've been involved in various parts of the development of those on the panel as well. So would any of the rest of the panelists like to just give a couple of minutes on one of the other ventures?
Yeah, I can speak to Autoscriber. So Autoscriber is a healthcare startup, and the idea is that you, especially in the EU, they have quite a big burden on doctors, because the requirements for electronic health records are really high. So doctors, for every hour they spend with a patient, they could easily spend another 2 hours just on administration. So Autoscriber's goal was to basically see if we can automatically summarize and populate the electronic health records, after the patient and the doctor consented to the consultation being recorded. And this is being piloted in the Netherlands with a Dutch medical university called LUMC. So that's, and they've recently spun out and received funding as well.
I'll quickly talk to Enabler and Knowledge Marker. So Enabler was the very first venture that CapeAI had started, and Enabler is a data labeling platform as well as community. And so what Enabler has done is it's basically provides companies with the ability to get all of their data annotated and labeled for machine learning use cases. And it does this by basically creating micro jobs in South Africa. Enabler's got its own tooling basically that facilitates customers and helps them to get their data labeled. And then Knowledge Marker is essentially a collaboration tool that leverages NLP and graph technology. And what Knowledge Marker tries to do is basically connect people in large organizations or large communities who don't know that they exist, but on similar things. So for example, if you all of a sudden start a project and you're working with TensorFlow Lite, and Knowledge Marker will hook into GitHub and maybe your organization's Bitbucket, and it'll be able to say, hey, this guy Aubrey in your organization, who you've never spoken to, has actually used TF Lite before. Why don't the two of you connect so that you can share knowledge and resources? So Knowledge Marker is just an internal collaboration tool to help large companies who struggle with sort of reinventing the wheel and losing communication as they grow.
Great, thanks all. Then there was a question a little further down in terms of the voting that I wanted to address. So someone had asked, and it's an anonymous question, would there be a market in South Africa for a rewards-based data labeling system that takes in images and potential labels and returns labeled data? So for that person, whoever you are, I recommend that you check out the Endeavorx website and see that that is a startup that has taken off, and I think is quite similar to what you're suggesting. And so you can kind of get a feel for what's going on there. Then moving back up in terms of voting, up near the top, we have what is special about growing a machine learning startup in South Africa? Are there more opportunities here because the space is still empty? And what are the specific challenges? And again, I think anybody on the panel can get stuck in.
Cool. I'll take a stab at it. So I think what's quite interesting about South Africa and Africa as a whole is we have a lot of potential to innovate and to grow, and we've got a lot more resource restrictions compared to more developed countries, which means that, for example, we kind of skipped the landlines and went straight to cell phones, where other countries developed at a much more like linear rate. So I think in Africa also, we have one of the youngest populations. So we are seeing a massive growth in just people uptaking things like insurance, people uptaking things like cellular services, buying cars. So there's like a much higher potential for growth in South Africa and Africa, simply because we're starting. We had a back foot for so long as a continent that we now have to catch up, but that also gives a lot of opportunities for innovation. And I think I think in terms of specific challenges, I think we need to address a lot of things like poverty, job creation is a really big, education. So there's a lot of opportunities that we can innovate using machine learning and contribute to the environment and the economy.
If I may also add a few things. So I think what's special about starting a machine learning startup here is that this is a new thing for South Africa, right? And so I think that it's quite exciting, and you can generate a lot of interest. And then over and above that, I think like South Africa is really like it's got so much of talent, right? And this is what's perhaps like the narrative out there is that South Africa perhaps doesn't have as much AI talent as Europe and stuff. But in actual fact, I think the talent is there. If you look at how all of our largest universities are starting to curate MSc and PhD programs that are, dedicated to growing ML skills, then it's there. And CapeAI is evidence of that, right? Like, we do work for clients in Europe, and we get nothing but positive feedback about our talent. And so I think that's one of the things that's quite special, and the opportunities are there. If I have to talk about like the third part of the question, which is like, what are the challenges? I think like access to funding that's not the challenge in itself, but perhaps awareness of the avenues where funding exists is a challenge, right? And I think that is something that needs to be cultivated in entrepreneurs in South Africa and outside of the ML space. How do you find funding for a business is something that's not easy, but it's also not something that South African entrepreneurs have a lot of access to. But these things are starting to come up. The second thing that I see as a bit of a challenge to starting ML businesses in South Africa is like, you've got to socialize the value of machine learning and AI quite a bit, right? And so even in the consulting space with large corporates, what we found is that people don't actually really know and understand or comprehend what AI and machine learning is. And so if you want to go down this path, you're going to have to go through a lot of effort to actually socialize this value, to make sure that people know why is it that ML is needed, why is it that ML is important. And so I think that's one of those unique challenges. It's really like an education thing, and just getting these conversations. Communities like the Deep Learning Indaba community, Masakane, all of these like platforms are doing a fantastic job at socializing the value of AI, which is going to bring down the barriers to resistance of starting ML businesses.
Yeah, if I can speak to what Adit's saying, we often get the question, how do you get into machine learning or data science? And just go and learn how to program is always my answer. Get a BS degree if you can, but otherwise teach yourself to code and you can go from there. But sort of more to the point of what I'm trying to get to is, we have an environment now in South Africa where we often, and this might be controversial to say, we do have a slightly slower adoption curve than the rest of the world. But what I at least perceive from that curve is that when we do start adopting, we adopt very aggressively. And I think we're now at a time where the iron is as hot as it's going to get for us to start striking. And I think there's like massive demand as the fallout of COVID hits and then passes, for people to realize, hey, there's these new technologies out there, we can adopt them, they can improve our business, they can either open up new avenues of business, or they can relieve bottlenecks through optimization. And yeah, I don't think that's a better time to be in Africa in general for applying this technology.
All right. Thanks for your comments, panelists. We are going to have two more questions, and I'm going to jump a little way down the list for the penultimate question, because it ties in quite nicely with what you've all just been commenting on, which is, how do you guys go about educating your clients to what machine learning is, so that they understand the actual capabilities and shortfalls? How do you change it from being a magical black box to something real? And Christo, perhaps we can start with you on this one.
There you go, Christo.
How do we make it real? Blood, sweat, and tears, I think, is the short answer. Yeah, it's hard work. Machine learning, a lot of people have this perception that artificial intelligence has some level of intelligence behind it. And also, I wish that was true. Really, what it takes is a huge amount of painstaking effort to guide these models so that they work, to make sure the data is clean so that it works, and to give the customer expectation management framework which they can work with, so that we speak the same language and then communicate effectively. But yeah, I think Byron has something to add.
I was just going to add a simple concept, and it's something that we actively practice at CapeAI. I will often throw in on a Friday a session where we try to explain a concept as simply as possible. And we take a complex complex explanation, and we make it as simple as we can so that anyone at any level can understand it. And sometimes approaching a client with a huge, deep explanation of exactly what's happening and the technical terminology and all of that in it is unnecessary. And sometimes all they need is for you to take all of the blocks, align them up, and build a beautiful story out of it and explain how it's going to work, how it's going to benefit them. And that's all you really need.
If I can add on to that, so as Byron was saying, like, so one of the things that we do specifically is like we drill the importance of storytelling, right? Every Friday, I've got everyone in the team basically doing some sort of a pitch. If you learned about random forest today, you need to be able to explain what a random forest is to everyone in the company in a simplified way. And so you want to avoid technical jargon. But then beyond that, beyond the storytelling ability, I think one of the things you want to do is you want to show, right? And so you want to leverage case studies and past work that you've done. This is a really, really important and it weighs quite heavily in being able to get clients to work with you, right? So if you can show them what you've done in the past and you can make that very practical and concrete, you've done half the job. So success stories, case studies. What we do is we when we conclude projects, we try and write a blog post about it so that we add it to like our portfolio of work. And then you also is that like people are visual, at least they consume information visually the best. And so you don't want to talk about a random forest by diving into the mechanics of the algorithm, but you rather want to go into like visualizations of what the output is and how do you see value coming from that. So there's a lot of like show and tell that's also involved that plays a big part.
All right. And then for our final question, which I think the panel for the most part sort of bears this out, and I think it's a tricky question for us to answer perhaps, but I think it's an important conversation to have. Why is the South African tech startup scene so white? Is it? What are the obstacles specifically applying to Black entrepreneurs who want to grow a business in machine learning? And I see there've been a couple of comments there in the question box already. Also very male dominant. Would be interesting to see some stats. Maybe access or peer groups or role models would be an interesting research topic. So this is something that people definitely want to talk about. And I'd be interested if anyone on the panel feels that they can have a stab at answering that question.
Yeah, I can give my sort of 10 cents on this. I think it boils down to communicating to the greater population of South Africa that there are really massive opportunities in technology that can be seized, and you can do amazing things with relatively little. But unfortunately, it does require access to technology, and that is sometimes a hurdle which I don't think is easy to overcome. So yeah, there are unfortunately difficulties that we face in South Africa like that, but I definitely think that we need to encourage a culture in South Africa that being nerdy, being techie, loving the idea of writing code till 3 in the morning is awesome, and that is something almost anyone can do once they've got their hands on even a phone. And these opportunities are ripe for the picking right now. We've got tons of online content on YouTube that you can follow. And the time is now to try and get into these things.
Thanks, Christo. And Adit, you were saying?
Yeah, so I think like I'm not quite qualified to talk to this a bit, but I've got views on it, right? And I think that one of the things that we cannot ignore is the fact that I think like why the scene is perhaps so white and male dominated is because the people who are starting out a lot of businesses, this is not their first rodeo, or they've got people within, let's say, their family or their networks that have sort of done this before. And so that means they have access to this information. They have access to resources, in other words, people and skills, and they have access to money. And so that means the path and the barriers that block someone from starting out their own business, there's much less of that for white males in South Africa. That's my first comment on it. And then sort of by the same token, I think that one of the things that is perhaps there but needs to grow a lot more in awareness is that same sort of thing being cultivated with Black entrepreneurs and amongst Black communities, which is saying, how do successful Black entrepreneurs and Black-owned businesses start to now also get people within their networks so that they can share this information, share those resources, share that sort of wealth. And then what you'll start to see is gradually more and more people, that barrier to entry starts to break down. So I think it's largely influenced by the history of our country. Yeah, that's my comment on it.
Thanks, gents. Anybody else on the panel? It doesn't seem like it. Perhaps that's something that's... Oh, Jeannie.
Yeah, I also can't speak to the experiences of like people of color, but yeah, I think just speaking to the male-dominated side, I think, like, obviously the industry is very male-dominated. I mean, there's a reason why there's 5 males on the screen and 1 female. But yeah, I think the most important thing, I think, is just even if you are in a position of privilege, you can also make a difference. You can also lend yourself as an ally. You know, cultivate, like, mentor people. You can, you know, you can set up your hiring pipelines to be more fair. And yeah, there's obviously a lot of things that you can do within your company as well. There's a lot of culture issues that you can address. You know, ask yourself, is your events that you are hosting inclusive? Is the environment that you're creating, is it encouraging people to stay? People that might feel like they get left out, or people that feel that you know, they're not seeing themselves in this company at all. It's very, very hard if you come in and you're one of 2 females or one of 2 Black people in a company. It's terrifying, and it's scary, because you feel yeah, you feel like, you know, if you leave, then there's literally 1 person left, or you want to see more of yourself in the people around you. So I think obviously you need to get there first. You need to build up your pipeline. You need to encourage the people that you do have to grow and to stay, and you need to also help those people grow to the point where they can become entrepreneurs themselves. Like, you know, no one becomes a CEO of a company by accident. There's a lot of other people that help with that path and with that development, and the people around you play a big role in cultivating your development. So yeah, that's my view.
Thanks, Jeannie.
Matt, if I may.
Yep.
So I think, like, Jeannie touched on, like, some really important points there. And the other that came to mind is, like, if you are in the entrepreneurial space, right, and you're a founder and you're running a business, you've got to think very carefully about, like, the messaging that you put out there internally as well as externally. You got to think about subtle things like, if you post an infographic on LinkedIn, right, about I don't know, something random, but basically you post a picture on LinkedIn from your company. What we don't realize is, like, some of the biases that exist out there on the internet is, for example, like, most pictures will be with white males, right? And so I can't help but feel like a lot of these subtle messages also have some sort of an influence. It's hard to obviously quantify that correlation, but I think that entrepreneurs have to be very conscious about this thing. It's not an easy thing, and that means, like, the people in the scene need to be very open to having these conversations, checking their blind spots, and just trying to do better.
I think Adit is definitely spot on with that. And from a marketing perspective, you do have to be very aware of the content that you're putting out and make sure that you are very careful and make sure that your infographics and your images that you share are inclusive. It's certainly something that we've taken into consideration and something that Adit and I have certainly discussed. Going forward, we do make sure that all of our content goes out and it's inclusive, but we do always need that final filter, and we need someone to check us and make sure that we haven't missed something out, because it's so subtle that sometimes you overlook it. It's a simple thing to make sure that there's equal representation in an infographic where there's a group. It's small things that you occasionally miss.
Yep, thanks for adding that, Byron. I see we have reached the end of our time slot. I hoped that, well, I put that question at the end in the hope that discussion might continue in the other online forums associated with Indaba𝕏, and that we would, in those spaces, I hope, be able to get a more diverse perspective adding to that conversation. So please, those of you who are here and who are listening and who would like to give input, please, please, please do join that community, hit that button at the bottom, and let's get that conversation carrying on from there. And with that, we have reached the end of the panel discussion. Thanks for listening. Thanks to our panelists for giving their input. We appreciate it. I think there was a lot of value to be gained from the answers that you all offered. So thank you very much. And I think I now will be handing over to the Zindi folks.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to kick all of you off. That's my privilege. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. What we'll now do, thanks Byron, thanks Christo. What we'll now do is we'll introduce our hackathon. So I'm gonna just give me 1 second. I'm gonna pull up Paul and I'm gonna pull up Samuel. I hope you two are ready. So everyone, if you have any more questions, feel free to ask in the Discord channels. There are plenty of channels. You can use the office hours. If you want to specifically ask some questions to the company, we'll still answer some questions for the rest of the day. And then, yeah, it was really, really great having all of you. I hope everyone that's joining now is ready to learn more about the hackathon that's happening right now. Paul, over to you, and Sam.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can see you, Paul.
Okay, great, cool. I haven't used Crowdcast too much, so I'm going to try and share my screen now, and let me know if you can see it. Okay, so yeah, I hope everybody can see my screen and everyone can hear me fine. Thank you so much to the CapeAI team and to the Indaba𝕏 team. It's a privilege to be here, and I've really enjoyed listening in the last hour or two. I've kind of felt like I wanted to jump in at every point during that panel discussion. It's been a really relevant chat about well, relevant to me, I mean, tech and AI and startups and privilege and access to opportunity. Those are all things that we think about a lot at Zindi. So really cool to be a part of that. So I'm going to switch tack a little bit and talk to you about Zindi and about the hackathon that we're running. I wanted to be able to see, sorry, just give me a second. I would love to be able to see both things at the same time, but I don't think I can. So actually, let me just accept that and move on. Right, okay. So by way of introduction, my name is Paul Kennedy. I am Chief of Staff at Zindi, and I'd like to tell you all a little bit more about Zindi, and then Sam will take us through the details of the hackathon that we're running on Zindi, especially for Indaba𝕏 South Africa participants. So let me start with a story. I like to start with stories, and I was really happy to hear you guys talking about storytelling. I come from a communication background, so storytelling is very dear to my heart, especially in the tech space. So I'd like to tell you about Lawrence. Lawrence is an ambassador for Zindi, but he wasn't always that way. Lawrence decided to take his first step on his machine learning and data science journey about the time that Zindi started. So we're coming up to our 3rd birthday, so just around 3 years ago. We had a hackathon in collaboration with AI Kenya, and we launched, I believe it was an Uber movement data hackathon challenge. We launched the challenge. He was there at the hackathon, but he was intimidated. He was in undergrad, he knew maths and science, you know, he was studying mathematics and statistics, but the idea of participating in a competitive hackathon just was a bit too much of a hurdle for him to get over. So he didn't participate, but he did feel a little spark inside him, I guess we could say, because he went away and he thought about it, and he thought about it some more, and he decided that he needed to get involved in this thing called competitive data science. He read up, he reread all his maths and stats textbooks. He did found some curricula on YouTube and whatever, and he came back and he made a submission on Zindi. And he didn't look back. Since then, Lawrence has absolutely flown. He's won several competitions on Zindi. He's constantly sharpened his skills through a whole range of challenges. He managed to secure himself an internship at a chatbot company called Kala, actually implementing a chatbot or an NLP model as part of a chatbot that was developed through a Zindi competition that he placed 3rd in, I believe. He's now completing his master's degree at AIMS in Senegal. And I'm telling this story because at Zindi, we would like to believe that this can be the story of countless passionate, intelligent, hardworking human beings all across Africa and all across the world. There is no shortage of ability on this continent, but there certainly is a shortage of opportunity. And we are, at Zindi, we're committed to providing opportunity in the data science and machine learning space. So we always like to go back to this quote. This is from a partner of ours, Lawrence, who works at Microsoft in Kenya. And he said this at one of our major events a couple of years ago: the only way we're going to fix Africa's problems is with African solutions. And that's really at the heart of why we started Zindi. It's what we care about. It's what we're thinking about whenever we design a challenge or think about a new aspect of our platform or a new product. So for those of you that don't know Zindi, we are a social enterprise with a mission to empower a vibrant community of data scientists across Africa, all of whom are committed to solving pressing problems. What we've realized is that there are, as you know, there are problems aplenty. There's more and more data across the continent, but not yet the structures and the infrastructure in place to really connect the problem solvers with the problems and with the data. So that's really where we see our place. As I said, we started about 3 years ago. Since then, we have grown to, we're just closing in on 30,000 users registered. We have users in 43 African countries and more than 180 countries across the world. And something that we're incredibly proud of is that 1 in 4 of our users are female. That is comparable with global tech employment figures. So across the world, it's approximately 1 in 4 people in tech are female. So for us to achieve that in a niche field like data science in Africa, the dark continent, no less, I think that's really an incredible feat and something that I tell everybody because I'm incredibly proud of that. In the last 3 years, we've run 160 competitions and hackathons. We get anywhere between 500 and 1,500 data scientists per competition, and we have given away more than $300,000 in prizes, and a great deal of that money has gone to data scientists in Africa. We're also very proud to have hosted the largest virtual hackathon ever, as far as we know, in Africa. This is Hack Africa. If any university students are here, I'd be very happy to talk more about Hack Africa. We at Hack Africa 2021, we attracted more than 1,000 students, and we had representatives from more than 120 universities across Africa, which I think is just remarkable, and really a testament to the enthusiasm and to the growing, I guess, the growing movement of data science and machine learning in Africa. So, as I say, Zindi is principally a competition platform, a data science competition platform, and I'm very happy to, if we have time or if people are curious, take you all through the platform and show you a little bit about how it works, but it is really pretty user-friendly. We are in future aiming to make it more of, I guess, more of a community, more of a place to learn, rather than just a competition platform. We started out hosting competitions, and that's still our major function, but we're working very hard on a learning center, on a recruitment offering, and essentially making it a place where people, a kind of a one-stop shop for anybody interested in data science in Africa and accessing opportunities in data science. So I just included a few competition examples for you so that you know the types of things that we're addressing. I mean, the sky's the limit when it comes to machine learning solutions, but these are the kinds of things that we work on. We've had a competition to predict air quality data using using weather data or air quality sensor data. That was based in Kampala in Uganda. We've had machine translation competitions, natural language processing competitions, audio NLP competitions particularly have been quite popular. We do some, I think, some work in the fintech and insurance and logistics. Those sectors really lend themselves, they're data centric anyway, so those sectors really lend themselves to machine learning solutions. So we've had a number of those. And then, of course, a big one in Africa is agriculture. So things like using computer vision to recognize diseases in fruit, or again, computer vision using satellite imagery for classification of fields, that kind of thing. Probably 30 or 40% of our competitions on India have an agricultural focus. So Sam's going to talk in more detail about the hackathon, but very briefly, we're hosting a hackathon for you guys that you are all welcome to join. We have 20,000 Rand in prizes, and the competition or the challenge for you is to predict if a customer has taken a product off the shelf. This is a challenge based on what you've been hearing about already, the work of Moonshop and CapeAI. So that's the challenge that we have posed for you. We're very happy to answer some questions. Also, if you have any issues signing up to the platform or understanding exactly how to make a submission, please do feel like you can reach out to me. We will also be keeping an eye on the Discord and keeping an eye on the discussion forums on Zindi. So if you have any questions, you can always ask, but you can also ask me right now. And if you haven't yet, please go and sign up. You can sign up at zindi.africa. Sign up buttons to the top right. That's all from me. I'd really like to, if you haven't yet, to please at least have a look at Zindi. There are plenty of competitions out there for you. Something for every taste, from extremely beginner competitions through to relatively complex challenges. And yeah, I think all that's left for me is to say thank you very much for listening and best of luck with the competition.
Great, thanks, Paul. It's time for me to to give a little bit more detail on the competition. So I'm first going to mute my video. So everybody, this is what I look like. I'm a data scientist at CapeAI, and I prepared the hackathon with the rest of my team for you guys to compete in and win 20K in prize money. So without further ado, so can somebody just indicate, preferably through the microphone if they can see? Okay, cool, thanks. Okay, excellent. So the hackathon is titled Autonomous Shopper Prediction, and we're going to see if you can predict if a customer has taken a product from the shelf. This is the premier hackathon for the Deep Learning Indaba𝕏 2021 South Africa. So it will run for the entire duration of the Indaba𝕏. And I will give you more information on the exact start and end times and all of the logistics stuff right at the end. But first, I'm going to give you some more details on the competition. So first, before I do that, I'd like to just make some acknowledgements. So just a really big thank you to the Deep Learning Indaba𝕏 South Africa for allowing CapeAI to generate this hackathon and put a real world problem out there to be solved by anybody. So it's not really often that you get real world data that is messy and noisy and challenging to model as a competition. Often you go onto Zindi or you go onto Kaggle and the data is relatively clean and easy to work with. But this one, it's really going to challenge your ability to do modeling. And then next, I'd just like to thank Zindi for hosting the competition, allowing us to partake, and then also for doing all of the submission scoring and registration processes. So it's really an excellent opportunity for us and for everybody involved. So next, I'm going to talk about a little bit of background of the competition. So you guys, most of you have already attended the first part of CapeAI's talk, but just a quick introduction. So Moonshop is the first autonomous shopping solution in Africa. Okay, it's a really exciting venture that CapeAI has started, and it's really picking up momentum now with one location already fully operational in Greenpoint, Cape Town, South Africa. So just short and sweet, you need to determine if a customer has taken a product from the shelf in a sequence of video frames. So what happens is when a customer starts their session, they scan themselves into the store, and then the cameras start recording how they're interacting with the shelving, when they're taking products, if they are looking at different areas of the shelving. And what my team has done to simplify the challenge a little bit is we've taken shopping session, we've cut it up into 30 frame segments, and we have labeled those segments as if a take action has occurred or not. And then you are going to have to take in that sequence data and predict take action or not, 1 or 0. And the value for Moonshop is if you are able to do this, or if it can be a solved problem, it can really help us concentrate our machine learning efforts into certain parts of the shopper's session. So we don't have to use compute power for the entire session. We can rather say, okay, well, it's most likely that the shopper engaged with the shelving in an important way at these points in their session. Then we can run other models to determine what they took. So just quickly, how does the Moonshop look? So we've heard a lot about the Moonshop, but we haven't seen a lot about the Moonshop. So this is the one in Greenpoint in partnership with Wellness Warehouse. So from left to right, on the left, you can see the outside of the store. It's not a very big store. It can fit maybe about 2 people with social distancing. Next, you can see the QR scanner in the turnstile. So you would scan an app on your phone. You'd enter through the turnstile and begin your shopping session. Then beneath that, you can see one shot of the shelving. There's a whole lot of products in there that you can choose from. Then on the right, you can again see more shots of the shelving. And that's really where the magic happens, right? It's where the customers are taking the stuff off, maybe taking it with them, maybe putting it back, maybe just picking it up to look at and then putting it back. So it can really be an interesting experience trying to figure out who took what when. So I mentioned earlier about the frames of 30 sequences of 30 frames. So here is our founder, Peter Boone. He is taking a product off the shelf. And what we've done is that you are receiving data live shopping sessions. And so we're not actually giving you the video footage, which is really interesting. We are rather giving you key points on the shopper's body throughout their session. So if you take your attention to the right-hand side of the screen, there's a frame there with red dots all over Peter's body and then green lines connecting them. So those are coordinates that have been plotted onto the image that represent key points on his body or landmarks. So there's from the bottom of his body to the top, there's one for his foot, there's two for his heel, there's one for his knee, one for his hip, or two for his hips, all the way up to his eyes and his arms. And the model that we use to generate these key points is a 2D pose estimation model. So generating key points is part of a technique called pose estimation. And we use MediaPipe's pose landmark model called EndeavorX 3D. And it estimates 33 landmarks on the human body. So that you can, when you navigate to the Zindi page and you sign up for the competition, you can read more about EndeavorX and how it works. There's a link there for you to take you to Google's website when they created MediaPipe and EndeavorX. So this is just one frame out of 30. And at the center of a 30 frame sequence, if there was a take action, that's when he would really be reaching for that product. And what you're going to have to do is you will receive 30 lines in a CSV, and those would represent in each frame the locations of the key points estimated by the pose estimation model. And then you're going to have to classify if in those 30 frames a take action occurred or it didn't. So now just quickly some competition details. So you can scroll up in the chat link for the competition link. It starts right now. It's open. You can sign up. You can see the data. You can read about it. You can interact with it. You can even submit something if you are that quick. But yeah, you can. And then it ends on the 21st of November, 2021 at just 1 minute before 11 o'clock South African Standard Time. Then the leaderboard, the private leaderboard, will be revealed at 1 minute before midnight on the 21st of November, 2021 South African Standard Time. Then, different to a lot of the competitions you may have participated in before, the top 5 teams will be contacted and they will be required to submit a video explaining their solution and explaining how they implemented their model to predict whether a take action occurred or not. And then you will submit this video to CapeAI, and CapeAI will then judge, in combination with your score on the leaderboard, who the final top 5 ranking. So even if you landed 4th and you submitted an incredible video with an incredible articulation of your solution, you could end up being 1st or 2nd. It's a combination of both your score and the quality of your video submission. But we will be in contact with the top 5 teams after the private leaderboard is revealed. And then the final winners will be announced on the 26th of November at the closing ceremony of the Deep Learning IndabaX 2021 South Africa. So now I'm quickly going to take you guys through a starter notebook that I prepared. It's just a really simple implementation of a deep learning model to predict the take action. And it also contains a little bit about how to prepare the data that you'll receive from Zindi. This notebook is available on Zindi, so really don't have to do any screenshotting or any funny stuff. The notebook will be there for you to use for the entire duration of the competition. So here are just the logos of our 2 partners and then Moonshop's logo. First, some standard. So this notebook is in Python, by the way. Python is such a fun language to program in. You're also free to program in whatever language you want. So R is another good one. I don't know how much fun you're going to have trying to do deep learning in R, but I urge you to try. Okay, so I'm reading in the data here. Then, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pick out important points that I think is worth mentioning. And then, because I know that in the audience is varying technical skill levels, and this code is fairly easy to understand. And I urge you, if you don't understand it, to go and Google what the syntax I've used or the libraries I've used, because that's really the best way to learn, is to read about it yourself, play around, interact with it. It can also be a really fun experience. So I'm just creating what is known as a validation set. And what is important to note here is that you will get data, and then there will be rows and rows of frames with the key points estimated in them. And there's an ID grouping the frames into a 30-frame sequence. You don't want to be putting sequences from the same basket in a test set and in a training set, because that will cause what's known as data leakage, and your model will perform really poorly on the test set because it won't be able to generalize to a brand new basket, as it is you are validating on the same basket that you are training on. So you're getting the same configuration of key points, as the human body won't change frame to frame. So you're rather wanting to split the baskets. So this is what I'm doing here. I'm not splitting the frames, I'm splitting the baskets. And then creating the target, doing a bit of scaling. So those of you that have read a bit about deep learning, you'll know that scaling your inputs is incredibly important for the training process. But that again is, please Google, please go and check it out. The internet is an amazing place full of insane resources. And now finally, I'm doing something called changing the shape of my data so that I can pipe it into what's known as a sequence model. This is not the only way to do it. It probably isn't even the best way to do it. There are a variety of ways that you can take on this challenge. But what is really important is that you are using the 30 frames to predict the single target. You're not predicting per frame. But you'll find that if you try to do that, you'll find that really difficult, and your sample submission will probably be rejected. So what I'm doing here is I'm just taking, there are 898 observations in the training set, each of 30 frames, and there are 66 features. So an XY coordinate for each feature that BlazePose outputted. And then here is the shape of the target. So again, give this a try yourself, Google it. But I mean, there's hundreds of ways that you can tackle this problem, including doing some intelligent feature engineering to try and determine relationships between the key points. That's also a good thing you can try and explore. And then I quickly do a simple LSTM model. So LSTM stands for long short-term memory, and it helps with time series modeling. It's a really cool, it's a really great way to model time series. It's a really incredible invention. Also, urge you to read more about it. And then doing a little bit more of standard modeling stuff. Here is the training history. Here is a visualization of the training process. So just something to note here. The training loss, while it decreases linearly, which shows that the model is actually, like the training is actually taking place, the validation loss is oscillating pretty wildly. So that it can be indicative of a lot of different things. But one thing is that you don't have a serious abundance of data to be able to train your model on. So you have to be really intelligent about how you extract the features from your data. And you've really got to try and augment the data in any way you can. So this is just an indication of, if you just shove the data into a model, you will get the benchmark submission that's on Zini. So if you just uploaded your data, ran this notebook, and submitted your submission, which is created by this block, you will get the benchmark. So, or you might not, due to a bit of randomness in the training or in the way that you partition your sets. But yeah, so this is the starter notebook. If you guys have any questions, I haven't actually been looking at the chat because I've been presenting, but I'm going to, okay, so there are no questions. But if you do have anything that you want to ask and you don't want to send a message to Paul right now, please ask it on the Zindi competition discussion forum, because then my team will be looking there. They'll be there to answer questions, any questions you have about the data, any questions that you want to ask about how the prizes are working, how to make a submission. Really, that forum is really, really great, and we all get notified when someone posts something. And it's nice because it's also public, so then everyone can see if you're struggling or not. So that is me. I'm going to sign off now. Again, please I can hear someone's unmuting, but have a really good luck. Have a really great time doing this competition. It was a real pleasure to create. Moonshop is such an incredible thing to work on. And I really urge you guys to give it your best effort and win all the prizes. There's lots of prizes up for grabs. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much, everyone. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Paul, for your presentations. I think that concludes our event today. And I just wanted to say thank you for everyone, for the whole team who helped put this together, and everyone that attended. and stayed and are still here. Thank you so much, and really appreciate the support. And also thank you again to Cindy for hosting, and also just to the Indaba𝕏 team who's made all of this possible. Yeah, this is me signing off. Thank you very much.